Good morning, everyone. And we're going to call the CalSTRS meeting to order. You could take the roll, please.
Sure. Controller Yi?
Here.
Mr. Unterman?
Here.
For the State Treasurer, Ms. Elliott? Here. Ms. Hendricks?
Here.
Ms. Vargas?
Here.
Mr. Rosensteel?
Here.
For the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Zuma? For the Director of Finance, Ms. Ortega? And Ms. Higa? Controller Keeley, you have, Chairperson Keeley, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. In looking at the agenda and our timeline for today, my hope is that we will get through to about item number 8 prior to lunch. So I'm hoping we'll get to item 8 before lunch. Just before lunch, we're going to have a closed session item for about, I have it scheduled for no more than 15 minutes. So for my colleagues on the board, we're going to have closed session for 15 minutes before lunch to deal with a personnel matter and to help us jumpstart our evaluations that we do at our offsite in October. So Sharon, Hendricks, and myself would like some of your feedback and guidance for us over the next 30 days as we prepare for that offsite conversation in October relative to the evaluations. So we're really efficient, we hope, in October. So that would be 15 minutes before lunch. So having said that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the board agenda.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 2A are committee reports. The 2A committee report that I have in front of me that says to be read during item 2A by directions of the Audits and Risk Management Committee. I move to accept the independent auditor's report for the restated schedule of proportionate share of contributions for employers and non-employer contributing entity for the year ended June 30th, 2014, and schedule of aggregate pension amounts for employers and non-employer contributing entity as of June 30th, 2014. And by the direction of the Audits and Risk Management Committee, I move to adopt the amendments to the 2015-16 audit plan as proposed by our Chief Auditor.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved, and I don't believe it needs a second because it's by the committee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I don't see anything else that needs to be read into the record. 2B is the consent item, the approval of the minutes, so I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of July 9th, 2015.
So moved.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. 2C is board education.
I abstain.
And may it be noted that Ms. Vargas abstained from 2B. Board education, any questions? All those in favor of 2C, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 2D, anyone pulling 2D? Any questions on 2D? Do we need to vote on each one of these consents? Okay, thank you. So 2D. 2E, the 2015-16 adjustments to the budget. Any polls or questions? 2F, the appointment of the California Actuarial Advisory Panel. Questions or a poll?
Congratulations, Rick.
Okay. So those are 2B through 2F. We'll just take one vote on those. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item 3 are committee reports, also consent. Don't see anything that has to be read into the minutes. Anything for 3 on the committee reports? Again, that's a consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Which brings us to item 4, the adoption of the employer direct reporting regulations. This is an action item, and Mr. Durman, welcome. Ed.
Wasn't I just here? Yeah, so there's 2 regulatory items. The first one is item 4, and it is the adoption of the direct reporting regulations. This is something that you reviewed the draft regulations back in April, and it's basically providing some criteria by which individual employers could directly report to CalSTRS rather than reporting through their county office of education. You reviewed the draft regulations in April. There was a public comment period that ended in June, and the hearing was held on June 17th. There were no comments, any objections, or any recommended changes made to the regulations. The proposed regulations are attached. They have not been changed since you last saw it. So we would recommend adoption of the proposed regulations. And then once you have adopted them, and they're approved by the Office of Administrative Law, then they become effective in January. So we would recommend adoption of the regulations as drafted.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions for Mr. Durman? Seeing none, then this is an action item. Entertain a motion to adopt the staff recommendation. It's been moved by Ms. Ortega, seconded by Ms. Higa. Seeing no questions, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Durman, you also have item number 5.
Right. Excuse me. And these are amendments to the penalties and interest regulations that were first adopted by the board back in 2012. Specifically, this has to do with some instructions to employers for submitting files to CalSTRS, which has reporting information around compensation, both for the DB program and for the cash balance program. Under the rules, if we modify the file specifications, they have to be they're referenced in the regulations as of a specific date. So if you modify the file, you have to modify the regulation to update that date. So the changes that we are making are in the file specifications are largely in response to the enactment of PEPRA, which added new benefit structures, and also for the changes in the contribution rates under AB 1469. There's also some technical changes being made to it. The board had earlier directed us to proceed with that, and we have submitted the proposed draft. We've exposed it to our stakeholders to get their initial comments. We had gotten a couple of comments from employers through the Employer Advisory Committee about some changes they'd like to the process. We've looked at that. We think that for the time being, we want to stay with the language as it is. We may at some point down the road want to make some further modifications, but we think for the time being that what we have proposed in the draft regulations is the appropriate approach. So we would recommend that you direct the staff to initiate the rulemaking process so that we can begin that process in terms of a comment period and a hearing. And then again, the question is in terms of whether or not you want to delegate the hearing to Jack, as you did the last time, rather than having a hearing yourself. So those are the two issues. One is directing us to proceed with the rulemaking process, and do you want to delegate the hearing to Jack as we recommend? And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Hendricks?
I would just move approval and delegate authority to Jack.
Okay.
The motion.
Moved by Ms. Hendricks to move the staff recommendation and to delegate the authority to hold the hearing to our CEO, Mr. Enos. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Ortega. Seeing no questions. Yes.
Sorry, I was trying to run over, but my legs are short. We've requested if there are going to be hearings on regulations, even regulations that are being amended from previous regulations, it would be our preference for CTA if the board as a whole was able to actually hold the hearings. And we understand it can make things a little more complicated with staff and timing, but it actually allows easier transparency and oversights for not only us, but for a multitude of constituent groups. So while that may or may not happen for this particular set, we would ask that in the future, if it's possible for the board as a whole, to hold the hearings. That would be our particular preference for oversight.
Teachers Association's preference for this one itself?
Not
also
for
the
all.
board to do?
Any time CalSTRS is considering current regulations or new regulations, we would prefer a cap on new regulations until we have further conversations. But anytime there are discussions of regulations, it is our organizational preference that they be done by the board as a whole for the hearings.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Mr. Chairman, do you want to respond to that in terms of?
Is that add excessive,
It would have, I mean, we'd have to, in terms of the timing of the events, it would have to take place at the February meeting.
sure.
You know, I mean, quite honestly, when we've had the hearings in the past where they've been delegated to Jack and nobody shows up, it's a momentary thing. It's just a question of how long you want to sort of take up the board's time to
Right.
address that.
No, I appreciate that, and I think having heard that, I would like to encourage the board to respect the request of Ms. Baker's representing our stakeholder organization that is disproportionately the highest number of members that we represent and we're serving. If, and in fact, no one shows up, then it's just something that's on our agenda. We approve it and go forward, but in this, with this suggestion, at least it provides that opportunity. I think it's a reasonable request that Ms. Baker's making, and
You want to make a friendly amendment?
well, I
Or
think
somebody
you can make a friendly
Can I make a
amendment.
friendly amendment to my own amendment?
Sure.
My own motion? I will make a friendly amendment to change and have the board have the hearing in February, correct?
Okay, Miss, and it's been seconded. Ms. Yee?
I guess just a clarification, in the prior motion with the delegation to our CEO, the regulations would come back before it proceeds to.
Yes, you would still have to
Yeah, so we still have another opportunity for concerns to be expressed before the board. I'm going to oppose the friendly amendment. I just think as a matter of efficiency, this is something I feel very comfortable delegating to the CEO.
There's I think, a parliamentary, I guess we have to take a vote on the
Yeah,
substitute
just
motion. Or, no, you know, the second, because the friendly the amendment to the original motion was made by the original maker, I don't believe it has to be seconded. I mean, it doesn't have to be voted on up or down. Okay, so we're gonna, further discussion on the current amendment, the current recommendation, which is on the floor, which is for us to have the hearing itself and at the February meeting. Yeah, Ms. Ortega? You wanna, let me get you, there you go.
I'm not gonna oppose the changed motion, but I do agree about the efficiency. So maybe the staff can think about some way of doing this and that the constituents don't have to testify before the board and then have another meeting later on where if there are issues raised, those same issues have to be raised at a second meeting when we actually consider adoption of so if there's a way to make it more efficient, holding it before the board, I mean, I would encourage us to figure out
Yeah,
what
I
that
guess-
would be.
And I don't know, maybe Brian, you would know in terms of whether or not at the point of adoption of regulations, whether it's sort of really an opportunity for comments to be given at that point, because that's really what the hearing is for.
Yeah, but
Well, if people object to the regulations, I assume they can still come to the board meeting and object again, even,
Yeah,
that's
I know
my
that.
experience in where other regulations are adopted.
it would have to be if there were, so the way the APA works is you have the hearing and comment period, respond to the comments, and then if there are no substantive comments, in other words, that would affect the textual changes, then you can bring them forward for approval. This board is the approving entity, so they would always be presented to the board for approval, so staff would not be approving the regulation. The hearing is an opportunity for comment. Of course, we accept written comments as part of the procedure, and it's based upon those comments that then determine what the time period's going to be before you get to the final vote. So much of the process is dictated by law, and so the hearing is a necessary procedure as you draft the regulations or as you bring them along. So, I mean, we can work with you and try to figure out the most efficient process possible, but much of it is dictated by the Administrative Procedures Act and how you adopt regulations. But I
Right.
do want to reemphasize that no regulation gets approved until it comes before the board, and the board doesn't have to approve it. And so if there are people who stand up and say, or there's an objection and the board wants that to be addressed by staff, can send it back and send staff back to reconsider it, hold another meeting, take in more information. Again, it's just because the package is presented by staff to the board, that doesn't mean that it has to be approve, that there are other opportunities depending upon the instruction of the board.
Ed, the credible comp regulations, the
Mhm.
hearings were held by Jack? Or
No, I
they
think
were
credible comp was held by the board.
by the board, okay.
It was these more technical.
Okay, okay,
Penalties and interest and credible comp was held by.
right,
These last two, no one showed up.
Yeah.
So they were.
yeah, okay, well.
And also, if there are comments that are submitted by someone, we have to actually respond to those comments and then.
Right.
You know, how
Right.
do we address them, or just say, well, we're gonna go ahead with what we've done anyway, so we have to acknowledge every concern that's raised in a situation we tell people.
And that information is also presented to the board, what the comments were, what our responses were.
Mr. Rosensteel?
So if I understand what Brian's saying is whether we hold the hearing or Jack holds the hearing, we're still going to have a public meeting at which people will be able to comment, and we will be able to respond, including saying, we want staff to go back and respond to these comments. So it really seems like it's a question of whether the board holds two hearings effectively, or the
Right,
board
exactly.
holds one hearing, and staff holds a hearing before the board holds.
Yeah, my job in the hearing is only to call on people and get a record made for you.
Yeah,
It's not a
so-
very demanding role.
So I'd like to understand why, given that there are still two opportunities for public input, one from the board doesn't have to accept what is before us if we want to respond to those comments. I'm not sure, in the interest of trying to limit the board's involvement in things that for the purpose of kind of the efficiency of the board focusing on decision-making. The proponents of this, I'd like to understand why the board why this change would make the board more responsive in the process.
So although this is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, I think the way in which the question was asked, I think I'll defer to Ms. Baker, who's really made the request on behalf of the stakeholders of the California Teachers Association. If you could respond, Ms. Baker, to Mr. Rosensteel's query, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, and we certainly appreciate the complexity and recognize that we don't want the board to have to do anything that could be redundant. The history of the Teachers Retirement Board has not been long when it comes to focusing on regulations. It has not been something that this board has been involved with until just recently over the past few years. So this is a very large change in culture and change in the oversight process. The past has always been focused on legislation, and that's been the way functionally that CalSTRS has tried to achieve these goals and objectives. And so because it's a new process, there have been a few bumps in the road that have caused us concern with how the process moves forward and, more importantly, how it all gets implemented. So until we address all of those bumps in the road and feel confident that what is being discussed and then what is being implemented are both the same things, we would prefer the board to have broader oversight. It's our understanding from a multitude of hearings that school and community college district boards have regularly. Oftentimes they have to have a hearing and it's agendized. You say, okay, we now have the hearing, look around, there's no public comment, close the hearing and move on. So most of the time, our understanding is that it would just be a matter of, 30 seconds to a minute having the conversation. It would not be a regular occurrence to have quite a bit of public comment unless you have a very large item, for example, like the credible comp regulations that were much more complex. So it's a matter of trying to understand what the long-term process is going to be, but because regulations have not been the tradition of this institution until we feel that the process has all been put together in a strong manner, we would prefer the board to have that functional oversight.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Ms. Yee?
I wanted to just ask Ed the recommendation about delegating this particular item for hearing to the CEO is specific to this item, but I think, I don't think we're changing anything with respect to more substantive issues coming before the board for hearing. And I guess what I would say to you, Jennifer, is that I think the Administrative Procedures Act is pretty prescriptive about the timeframes, and so I know you're new to this process, but it actually is a good guide in terms of just outlining for you what that process is going to look like, the timeframes you have to submit information for responses. If it were to come back before the board and we didn't adopt anything, that starts kind of the calendar again in some fashion with respect to giving you more time. So it's pretty prescriptive, and I would really encourage you to kind of look at that, because I think it's going to be an issue of efficiency on both ends, really. And but I think I'm comfortable, particularly if the more substantive issues are still going to be within the purview of the board, to hold the hearing. So.
Not to belabor the point, in the spirit of keeping things simple, especially this, it's a little complicated. I think there's a balance of access to the board, etc. And the fact that these hearings in the past have not taken a lot of time. People aren't lined up before us, so it's not as if the board's time is going to be consumed by this hearing if we hear it ourselves. If history is to repeat itself, it'll only be a few minutes. In any event, why don't we just call the question? So the substitute motion is for the board to have the hearing placed on our agenda in February. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're going to have to do a show of hands. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Okay, thank you. So that motion passes. We'll place it on the agenda for February for the board to have the hearing. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for your work on these issues. Thank you. Item 6 is our Chief Executive Officer's report. Mr. Enos, Jack, good morning.
Good morning. I was just going to highlight 3 things for you that, since we wrote that report for you. First, we've getting ready for your offsite, and hopefully you'll have a book in front of you. Boards that lead, and Professor.
Well, apropos.
I know, and it's written by 3 professors, but we're very excited to have really one of the leading authorities in the United States from the University of Pennsylvania be your speaker for the offsite. Professor Usim, I think he pronounces his name, and he's published heavily on this and has consulted to major corporate boards, and he was very excited about working with you. So this can be a little different for us at the offsite, so that should be fun. Second of all, I did want to make sure you all get a chance, and all of us, to just say goodbye to our retiring Director of Accounting, Lou Nguyen, who's in the audience with us today. Lou, stand up so everyone sees you. And, you may not all know her that well, and that actually says a lot, because in many ways, because she has, if I had to pick out some of the hardest jobs at CalSTRS, she's near the top of my list, I'll be honest with you. It's a job that doesn't get you necessarily in front of the board, doesn't get you in the newspapers every day. She doesn't do any television interviews. She's just here every day working hard as our Director of Accounting. When I first came in 2002, and through 2004, before she became our director, we had 2 other directors of accounting. And point being, it was a very hard job here because we did not have a sound financial system for all these years. And so Lou's, working with Robin, has gone through 2 major periods here, from a very decentralized, paper-ridden process to a now state-of-the-art corporate system, if you will, an SAP system. And it was hard thinking back in 2004, frankly, that our vision would be where it is today around our accounting systems. It's just so complicated, and there's so much change management with all of us in the organization getting through those kinds of accounting changes. So Lou is low profile, diligent. She leaves every night after everyone's gone. I see her going out to the car by herself, and late at night, because she has been working for us for 11 years and has a 34-year history with the state of California. So we wish her very well in her retirement. And last thing, I just want to make sure everyone in the audience too takes a look at the attachment to my report. If there was any doubt about the need for California to look at its policy around retirement and looking for establishing a system for those employers, particularly that have not done anything in this area, meaning something like secure choice that we're all looking at carefully now. This data on these 2 pages just underscores this. This comes from the National Institute on Retirement Security. The data is a little bit older. It's 2012 because of the nature of the data sources they're using. But as you can see on that colorful scale, we're one of the lowest rated states in the country. I mean, here we are, California. We're one of the lowest rated states in the country around retirement security. Our average balances for defined contribution accounts dropped over the year. There was a declining percent of workers being covered by a retirement plan that fell about 10%. I mean, that to me was the most compelling statistic in that we knew we had a problem to begin with, and already that has declined again by a very significant number. Only 2 in 5 workers are covered by a retirement plan in California. So you've heard me before, it's so deceptive to compare these 401k balances to a DB plan and set up this dichotomy of DP versus DC when half the country in California, only 2 of every 5 workers are covered by a retirement plan. I mean, this is really the compelling issue. And then if you looked a little farther down on the information, I thought it was very interesting. It's a statistic I had not heard before, that we have one of the highest unemployment rates among older workers as well. We often don't hear about unemployment rates in an age-graded sense. So together, all of these various statistics, as well as the information on retiree healthcare, we're at the bottom as well, really speak to the compelling need for a system like Secure Choice to make progress. So I'm hoping policymakers look at this information when this gets to be a stronger dialogue in 2016 in our state.
Thank you, Ms.
That's all I
Davis.
had.
Questions? Ms. Hendricks?
Jack, how often does NERS update this information? And how often is
I
it?
think we've done this every couple years. We
Every
try and
couple
do
years?
this. Yeah, and
So
there's
they
some.
should be
And Christina
coming.
mentioned to me there's some. She has some data as well. I don't know, Christina, if you want to weigh in a bit. Your hand is on the pulse of this too.
Yeah.
You want to weigh in, Christine?
yeah.
Let me get you, there you go.
My other hat is the acting executive director for Secure Choice, and we work a lot with AARP, and they recently did a study where I don't have the percentages, but currently in California, it was 6.3 million people do not have access to retirement right now, and that number has increased to 7.5 million Californians. And I'll get that information to you all. They sent the survey to us in the data and statistics, so it's really disheartening to read, but really makes the case for Secure Choice and other efforts throughout the nation because their numbers are similar in other states.
Right. Yeah, and I think this actually on the second page we got some historical data, so it's actually pretty far apart. It's 7 and 5 years. The other comparison points on that. But obviously the compelling part of this is not just the absolute values of these, but the relative values to other states, considering our leadership in other areas. We'd think we would be doing better.
So I assume this kind of
Wanna weigh
information, oh, sorry. This kind of information is getting to legislators and whether it's NERS or the information you're talking about?
Yeah, so we're working a lot with the various stakeholder groups at a national level, SCIU, AARP. It's an across the board issue. So there's both conservative people looking at this, and then the liberal side as well. It's really a unifying topic.
Ms.
So-
Elliott, are you familiar with the work that's being done out of Georgetown now?
So-
And the treasurers associations,
Yes.
treasurers across the
Yeah.
country?
Yes, so actually, my counterpart in Illinois is someone I speak to almost on a daily basis, and their legislation passed, but they're in a very similar place with respect to their study. So we're actually planning a trip to DC at the end of this month to get our treasurers with Secretary Perez with respect to the regulations that just went to the Office Management and Budget, essentially the White House. So they haven't been posted publicly, but there's a lot of interest in what those say, and we want to take the opportunity right now to provide the department feedback. But we speak weekly with Georgetown. Angela Antonelli is the executive director. there. And so, yes, there's a unified effort across the nation. And myself and Oregon's executive director, we're all speaking quite frequently, especially now that the regulations that,
Oregon's made some different
yes,
decisions, so,
yeah. But Connecticut, Maine, there's a really good group that meets regularly via telephone.
The other thing, I just to take it back in time a bit, as worrisome as these data points are, if you recall several years back now, Berkeley, the Labor Center, did their own analysis around retirement security of Californians. And their analysis was very powerful, showing the differential impact of these numbers on minorities and disadvantaged and low-income people. So if you take those cuts to this, then, it gets all of our concerns going on that. And they'll be doing some work, Berkeley is doing some work with us on our research work, which we'll present to you after next year.
Right, and there are consultants doing well, Overture Financial is the principal consultant, and they have subcontracted with Berkeley and Nari Reese specifically. And
She's great.
yeah, so we're very confident that we're going to have a really good study and findings at the end of this calendar year.
I wonder, it would be great if somehow we could
Yeah.
get that at some point.
Absolutely.
you know,
We should
for
bring
our
that
board.
into our
That would be
Yeah, I mean,
wonderful.
apart from that we're all experts here on retirement security, this also shapes voters' views on
Absolutely.
retirement security.
It
I
would
think
be
we should.
timely for us.
Yeah, my view is this is in our direct interest, this information, not just to be good citizens, but it affects our plan.
So I just want to reiterate what you just said, Jack, as you were saying that, as I was listening to the discourse that was going on here between my two colleagues. I was really thinking about the connection to CalSTRS. Our core mission is the retirement security of California's educators. And one could say, well, what does all of this have to do with your core mission? Mm-hmm. And I would argue a lot. Mm-hmm. Because we can be thought leaders on this issue. We can be the deliverers of the facts simply as they are. And as the retirement security of Californians and Americans all across this country continue to erode, it's only a matter of time before the retirement security of California's educators begin to erode. So to the extent that we can put the right amount of effort and energy into this issue nationally and be a simple thought leader, and of course we have to be thoughtful about how much resources, how much time, et cetera, so we don't deviate too much from what what's right in our zone. So thanks for always bringing this data to us, this information, and continue to work on a very important issue to all of us. Anybody else? Jack, anything else for us?
No.
Oh, thank you very much. Which brings us to,
Appropriately.
Right.
Retirement readiness.
yes, retirement readiness. Ms. Dobbins? Welcome. Come on up. Do we have a name plate for? We haven't,
I
yeah.
think she was up earlier, so it's
Yeah.
probably up there, I'm guessing.
And is the correct pronunciation Dobbins? Okay, very good. Good, Ms. Dobbins. Welcome.
Yeah, as you're saying, Annalisa, I always look forward to this report because the one we did just a few hours earlier with you around our performance is kind of looking back in the year how we did. This report that we do every couple of years is so fertile for where we go in the future, where there's holes in the membership, holes in savings, holes in thinking about things. I mean, to me, as you do your strategic planning, this is part of that raw material we all need to consider. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Thank you. I am going to be reporting out on the results of the retirement readiness assessment. The piece of research is designed specifically to provide insight into the financial standing of both our active, both our active and our retired members. The study is really a broad study. We collect a lot of information on a lot of topics. And for those of you who heard me speak earlier this morning, there's even more data points in this study. So I'm going to try to fly through a lot of information and provide an overview, and I'm happy to slow down and take questions, and if there's points of interest, I'm happy to provide additional information. Similar to the study reported out on this morning, this piece of research is conducted with a stratified random sample. The idea there is to provide relevant, representative data of our membership. And the first thing I'm going to do is try to provide a portrait on the retired member standing, financial standing. We ask retired members a series of questions, and it's really about, how are things financially for you in retirement? And the first question we ask has to do with the extent that the CalSTRS benefit is meeting the members' expectations around maintaining their standard of living. And we brought this spread of the data just to show the range of responses. And when I look at this, I look at that top 80% and say, okay, for 80% of our members, we're meeting or exceeding their expectations. So for the vast majority, I think the benefit is serving fairly well. And yet, for 20%, we're either failing or only slightly meeting their expectations. So there's a range of experience. And then we ask directly about the retired member's standard of living. And what we ask the member to do is to compare their standard of living in retirement to their standard of living immediately prior to retiring. And I think the idea is that we all hope to maintain, right? Nobody wants to go backwards after retirement. And again, I look at this data, I roll it up in terms of who's maintaining their same or a higher standard of living, and we're almost achieving an 80% there. And yet, for a few more than 20%, 23% are reporting that they're living at a lower or much lower standard of living. And then kind of continuing on the same vein, we ask members about their level of spending in retirement. And, did folks spend more or less? And I think there's a common belief that we'll spend more after we retire, or that we'll spend less after we retire. That's the idea behind the replacement ratio. What do we need? And most of us put that ratio somewhere less than 100%. People are actually spending about the same, 42%, and people who are spending less, it's 39%. But a full 19% report that they're spending more than they spent immediately prior to retiring. And I've got 2 slides on healthcare, just digging into where are the expenses for retired members. And this question asked retired members, how is their spending on healthcare compared to what they expected to be spending on healthcare in retirement? And 37% are spending more on healthcare than they expected to. That's a fairly big portion. 54% are spending about what they expected, and 10% are spending less. And to further understand the issues around healthcare and this expense for retirees, we asked people who actually have health insurance premiums, how difficult is it for them to pay for those? And this picture is, somewhat reasonable. 66%, the majority say that those premiums are slightly or not at all difficult. And I just want to point out that this question is asked of those who have health insurance. And 21% of retired members report that they don't have health insurance. And when asked why they don't have it, the most prevalent explanation is because the premiums are too expensive. So it's that little piece of information is important when you look at the spread. So we collect a series of, we ask a series of questions that are very similar for active and retired members. And this is so that we can make some assessments and look at how things are for active members and how they're trending along beside the retired members. And this slide talks about actions that both active and retired members have taken in order to prepare for retirement. And what you see is that the behavior is a little bit different, that that retired members report having seeing counselors and attending workshops at a higher percentage, and it's what we would expect. Active members are accessing the electronic means and reading the materials that we're pushing out to them. This compares sources of retirement income. Retired members report their actual sources of retirement income. What percentage of their income in retirement is coming from the CalSTRS benefit and the other sources that you see listed. Active members are asked about their expectations of where their retirement income will come from. And it's interesting to look at them side by side. For both groups of people, both the expectation and the reality is that the majority of the retirement income will come from the CalSTRS benefit. And then you see the other sources as well. And taking a look at balance of voluntary retirement savings plans. Again, the question is phrased a bit differently for the active members compared to the retired members. Active members are asked about their current balance, and retired members are asked about their balance at the time that they retired. So it's a little bit different. The numbers are referring to a slightly different situation, and what you see in that active data is that those balances, by and large, are trending about even. There's a little bit of national data off to the side just to provide some comparison. It's not apples to apples numbers. The numbers that are quoted for the national sample include people who do and do not have a defined benefit. And this slide shows the distribution of those voluntary retirement savings plans. And you see again, side by side, the active numbers compared to the retired numbers. And you see that active members, a bigger percent of them have their accounts are in those lower balance range. And we presume that this was because of age, that we've got young people and new accounts that have time to grow and so on. And we looked at the data, in fact, that was true. The majority of the accounts that are below $50,000 are held by members who are younger than 40 years of age. Finally, in terms of voluntary retirement savings plans, we looked at the age that members report beginning saving. And a full 50% begin saving below the age of 30. Switching topics a bit.
May I just
Yes,
interrupt?
absolutely.
Go back one slide, please.
Yep.
So 50% begin active members, voluntary retirement savings, 50% of them start before 30.
Correct.
So those higher balances that show up later on are people, those generally disproportionately high number. The earlier you save, the larger that balance is going to be over time, right?
Correct.
So the key is to get people starting to save earlier.
Yes.
And then the question would be, what are the obstacles to people, our members, starting voluntary savings earlier? And some would say they can't afford to, but others would say there's some data that says the biggest obstacle is filling out the forms, too many choices. So from a policy perspective, how should we be thinking about that from a policy vantage point relative to ensuring the retirement security of California's educators. If we know that 65 to 70% ratio, replacement ratio, I think those are the numbers. So there's that gap, and we want to maintain that quality of life. I think that, does that get to kind of some key points in your presentation?
Yes, and there's some overlap with what I was presenting this morning as well. In the earlier piece of research, we looked at people's level of interest in being automatically enrolled in a voluntary retirement savings account. And that was because that is one of the single easiest ways, right? That's the overcoming signing the paperwork. The vast majority of members expressed interest, and younger people, a bigger percentage of the younger people expressed interest in participating in such a layout. So I'm not sure if you're asking me what I would recommend. That's what we investigated. We know that that is the single action that can really influence individuals saving early.
Right.
And we asked our members how they felt about it, and the reception was fairly positive.
Ms.
I was
Hendricks?
just gonna chime in, Harry, on your comment, because we talked about this earlier this morning in the Benefits and Services Committee about this idea of, auto-enrolling and just kind of sort of trying to pull away any hurdles or hindrances for people in terms of saving. And so I think we talked about, obviously, there'd need to be legislation for that. So it sounds like Ed Durman, there's some conversations happening around what's the feasibility for us doing that, but I think it's an interesting potential movement for us and other entities potentially to think about that.
It's an interesting option. I have a slide, I think a couple slides forward, that will talk about the obstacles that active members report. And I've given it some thought. We can talk about it when we get to the slide
Yeah,
if you
why don't you
want.
just continue with your presentation? I just wanted to make sure the connections that I were making were actually correct.
It's absolutely the way I think about
So
it as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Continue.
Okay, and we ask both active and retired members, what are their concerns around retirement? And I think that this overlaps very nicely with what we saw earlier as well around some of the awareness issues. In general, year over, active, what you're looking at right now are the active members. Their concerns are down year over, and yet 50% of that group of people, 50% or more, report they're concerned about being able to afford their medical expenses, right? The single biggest thing, and it continues to be the single biggest thing each year. Also, 50% are concerned that CalSTRS will have sufficient funds to pay their benefits. And that ties into the awareness. And being able to maintain their standard of living. People are worried about it. I think people are definitely aware of the issues. These are those same concerns rated by our retired members. And overall, you see retired people are not, their level of concern is not as high as the active. That makes sense. And similarly, year over, concerns are down, and medical expenses remains the biggest area of concern. We ask about awareness of Social Security offsets, and we focus, when I look at this, I focus on, do people know that this is a possibility, both for the windfall elimination and the government pension offset? And for active members, 50% when they're asked if they expect, whether they expect to be impacted, 50% on average say they don't know. They don't know if they're going to be affected by these offsets. So there's definitely an opportunity to increase awareness around this. Okay, here comes the obstacles. So we ask people directly, what are the obstacles that they experience in their life that prevents them from either saving or saving more for retirement? And they're the things I think that make sense. You know, the biggest obstacle, people say their mortgage, that's probably the biggest expense for folks. And pay, and then they kind of step down the line. I am going to dig in. I'm going to give you one more slide on this paying off student loans, and that's distinguished loans for the member as opposed to paying for college for their offspring. And that's significantly up this year. More members are saying this is an obstacle to savings for them. So we looked at, well, what kind of loans do folks have? And what you see is that members having big loans, those that are $50,000 or more, a significant portion of our members have those big loans. So it becomes, I think it becomes meaningful why that obstacle is up, looking at it year over. New research that we have going on. This year, for the first time, we asked active members what they expected the replacement ratio to be of their benefit, just to kind of assess expectations and awareness. A full 41% said that they were not sure, and I found it a little surprising, 25% said that they expected their replacement ratio to be somewhere between 76 and 99%. So again, there's an opportunity, I think, here for awareness. We also added a question about retirement income sufficiency, and this differs a bit from the very initial question that I presented, which focused on the CalSTRS benefit. This question focused on total retirement income and on the sufficiency of that income for securing, for having a secure financial retirement. You can roll the data up in various ways. 60% say their retirement income is mostly or completely sufficient. Again, we're the majority of the members are experiencing, I think, what we all hope to experience. And yet, you've got that 40% that their retirement income is reported as only being somewhat or not at all sufficient. I was interested in that question because, and I think this might speak a bit to kind of the connections that you're trying to make. I was interested in adding that question to the survey because I think our biggest goal is to secure our members' financial situation in retirement. And once we ask how that is, we can look at the drivers and obstacles. So we're using some statistics to look at different variables that we collect in this survey and see what's driving that perception of your income being sufficient. And clearly we're finding things like the amount that you've saved are relevant, but it's also interesting that engagement is relevant to feeling sufficient. Our theory is that people who are engaged and understand that they're preparing adequately, not just saving more, but adjusting their standard of living and adjusting their expectations so that when they get to retirement, there's a match between their expectations and everything is aligned. And that's all I have.
Thank you. I know we do have one member of the public would like to address us on this matter, and then we'll open up for questions or comments from my colleagues.
Is this on?
And let me acknowledge Ms. Bonnie
Sediel.
Sedell, Ms. Sedell.
Sediel.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. My name is Bonnie Sediel, and I'm an organizer for the Committee for Social Security Fairness. We became angry first in 2009 when we found about, when a lot of people found out about the WEP and the GPO. We have an online group of of subscribers, 3,500 people from across the U.S., all different public agencies represented. We try to be noisy. We did get 7,500 signatures on a petition to the White House from every state in the country, and we work with NEA, CTA retired. We work with CalRTA. We also have worked with Texas. One of the things that has really impressed me, particularly today, is listening to you guys and how you're looking at the whole person who's retiring, not just, what the bit that you give people. You're looking for our well-being. We did a survey that we started in March of this year, and we've got 2,600 responses from every state in the country, and Guam and Puerto Rico. And we have had a very strong impression about what is going on. The thing that struck me most about your survey is that half the people don't know about the WEP and the GPO. Our survey shows us that and this is, people, retirees. We had some people in their 80s who were doing this, trying to figure out how much. But for the WEP, we found that 36% of the people who are affected by the WEP lose 30% of their total pension and Social Security income to the WEP. For the GPO, not surprisingly, 45% lose 30% or more. So that's a big chunk. This is something people don't plan for. Half the people don't understand that it's coming. Most people, even those affected, don't understand how it works. One of the shocking things from our survey was that people who are affected by the WEP did not know that if you work for 30 years, you have 30 years substantial contributions, that the WEP doesn't affect you. People didn't know that. It was like, where is that? I'm not great at numbers right now. Anyway, so what has happened with this? When you look at your figures and people feeling insecure, they've been hit by something that has taken a huge chunk out of their retirement. Out of our group, we looked at just California people who got pensions from a school district. We found that 38% are still working after 65. This is not the kind of survey that you did, which was, scientifically done. This was people who cared to respond. Half of them said they would have planned differently if they had known about the WEP, or half of them said, my God, I paid attention to those statements that you get from the Social Security Administration. Those are not correct. 30% of them, and as you know, teachers very often work very hard during the summer to get their 40 quarters. So 30% of our respondents said, I wouldn't have done that, because they lose half of what they put in. I met Jack and I hit him immediately with, you know what, my lawyer said to me and my husband when we were divorcing, that I was going to get $1,000 a month in Social Security. But my half a teacher pension just totally eliminates that. 8% of our respondees said they would have had a better divorce settlement if they had known ahead of time that they were not going to.
So if you, I don't,
Let me end.
I want to make sure that you have enough time to address the board and bring to our attention your point, which is very valid and it's a key issue. Is there a website that we and the public can go to learn more about what you're doing in the efforts?
Thank you.
Thank you.
socialsecurityfairness.com. We don't have our survey results up, but we have a lot of information about the WEP and the GPO. Our More Information site is the easiest way to get to Social Security Administration or NEA's information. The Congressional Research Service publishes every 2 years reports. You can look at those reports on the condition of people. The last one is last year's, but there's a link to that, and a very good report from NCP SSM about how the WEP and the GPO hurt retirees. It's on there.
Thank you for
And
bringing,
join us.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention and the work that you're doing. It's a
Okay.
real battle. Thank you so
When
much.
I'm going to consult with your members here, and
Great.
and we will give you a report on what we saw from California teachers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Were there any other does anyone have questions or comments to Ms. Dobbins for her report and her presentation? Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Elisa. I do want to mention, we brought our research staff together under Elisa's leadership here some months back. She's got a PhD in
She's good.
research design and organizational development. So it's been real nice for the organization. For example, the question you asked us for the offsite is, what do other pension systems do with board consultants? Do they use board consultants? How do they reimburse them? Do they attend board meetings? Now we toss that question to her, and her staff do the research for us. So it's been yeah. So just pointed at me that we're trying to use, now we've got our own R&D shop under her leadership, and you'll see more of Lisa. So,
Terrific. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.